Hey, gang. Hey, ever since last month, middle of last month, September 18th, when the Fed did their rate cut, first one in about 4 years, many people have been left scratching their head as to why mortgage rates have moved up following that Fed meeting. Well, I've done a couple other videos explaining this. I thought of one other way to kind of illustrate this that hopefully will shed a little bit more light. So what I'm showing you here is a couple of graphs. By the way, I'm using the St. Louis Federal Reserve's website to illustrate this information. And so what I have here is the blue line is the Fed funds effective rate, while the red line is the 10-year Treasury yield. And so let's go back in time. All right, so if we go back to the dot-com bubble, you will notice that the Fed funds rate was in the mid 6% range. The Fed needed to stimulate the economy, so they did some massive rate cuts over the next year or so. By the end of 2021, they had the Fed funds rate down to about 1.5%. Look what happened with Treasury yields. Yeah, they came down, but there was actually periods where they were going up while the Fed funds rate was being cut. Come over here to the great housing downturn, massive rate cuts by the Fed. Yep, Treasury yields follow, but again, there was periods where they were going back up. And during this period here, we had quantitative easing. So in addition to the rate cuts that had already happened, the Fed was actually buying additional Treasury and mortgage bonds to stimulate the economy, driving mortgage rates lower. By the way, 10-year Treasury yield moves very much in a similar way to mortgage rates. So you'll see that it took a number of years, and the Fed's efforts finally got Treasury yields down into the below 2%. And we actually had some periods when Treasury yields went down as low as 1% and even a little bit less. Come over here, we have the COVID period. So the Fed was already in a cutting mode, and then March of 2021, April 2020, then the Fed did their last major rate cut. Again, taking the effective rate down to a 0 to 0.25%. Then inflation started to rear its ugly head. Massive rate hikes and Treasury yields did follow. And then finally, again, middle of last month, September 18th to be specific, the Fed did a half-point rate cut. And initially, there was no reaction. Well, I should say the reaction from Treasury yields and mortgage rates was they started going back up. So moral of the story here is that there's very loose relationship between Fed rate cuts and mortgage rates. If you give it enough time, you'll see mortgage rates actually follow what the Fed rate cuts, the movement of the rate cuts. By the way, I can send anyone this link. All you got to do is ask. Hopefully this helps shed a little light on this topic. Let me know if you want to talk more.